What it do, Dream Team? Welcome back to the channel. Here we are with Thomas Sowell. I hope I said that name right. This is what they don't teach you about colonization. I've started to react to a lot of content about kind of Britain's history, and we know Britain's colonized many places. And I feel like I've only really heard the negatives about Britain's colonization of these places, and I haven't really paid attention to positives about what this colonization brought to these places that they've colonized. And so since I've only gotten one side of the story, I've always thought it's been a bad thing and that Britain has done truly evil things and that they, you know what I'm saying? It's been bad. But I feel like I saw a comment that told me I'd only gotten one side of the story, and I completely agree with that comment. So I want to start seeing, and I've started looking at content, a lot of great things Britain has done for the world with the British Empire and everything. But I want to start learning more and see just what we aren't taught about colonization, maybe all the positives it brings, and then I feel like I'll be able to form a more educated opinion about whether I think it's a good thing, a bad thing, or I'll looked into what I needed to look into for myself without taking just so many people's words for it, I guess, in a sense. So we're going to go ahead and jump into this and see what we learn.
Thomas Sowell is one of the greatest philosophers of our time, yet he isn't even mentioned among the 100 most influential African Americans in Ebony magazine. To help more people learn about him, please consider liking this video and subscribing. To get useful materials about Dr. Thomas Sowell, please visit the website.
If the world was the way the left conceives it to be, the world would be a better world than the way the right conceives it to be. Unfortunately, the world doesn't happen to be that way.
Thank you, and let's begin.
Well, you link wealth creation to the acquisition of skills and the employment of skills in a disciplined way, and also in a frugal way in terms of lifestyles. But others would attribute the generation of poverty, the obverse of wealth, to colonialism, imperialism, exploitation, economic exploitation. How do you handle those arguments?
Well, insofar as those arguments are meant seriously, you can simply look at evidence. Insofar as they're purely political arguments, they're saying what people want to hear. Obviously, there are people who would much rather hear that than to hear the other, because if you think that's the problem, then there's not only a quicker solution, but there's a more emotionally and morally satisfying solution. Namely, you fight against the exploiters and so on. If you look at the third world, for example, those parts of the third world where the imperialist powers have come in have typically been the more advanced parts of it. They've been the most prosperous ones. Even if they weren't prosperous before they got there, they became the more prosperous parts. Those parts of the third world that the imperialists have never touched are, almost without exception, the very poorest places on this earth.
So you don't find any explanation for poverty and colonialism? The reverse, perhaps?
Oh, absolutely. That when the Romans, for example, invaded the British Isles, they conquered the southern part of Britain, but they never conquered Scotland. And for centuries thereafter, perhaps for 1,000 years thereafter, Scotland was far behind England in economic and cultural development, because England had the advantage of tying into the whole Roman civilization, and everything that it had created, to some extent, percolated down through the British. That doesn't mean the British were happy with the Romans being there. You know, 1,000 years later, Churchill could say, we owe London to Rome. But that's 1,000 years later, and Churchill didn't have to go through what those people went through. So I'm not saying this is good for the people who were there. But in the longer run, of course, England became what it was because the Romans came. And Scotland finally developed only after England conquered Scotland. And then the culture that developed in England then could spread into Scotland as well.
Well, does it...
Okay, so this is definitely a different perspective that I've been seeing in many videos. So he's saying it's the complete opposite. So he's saying colonization is the reason a lot of these places are more prosperous today, and all those places that the imperialists didn't go and didn't touch, those are actually more poor parts of the world than all the places the imperialists did go and colonize. And the reason that Britain developed so fast, I guess, is because Rome came and colonized England, but they didn't touch Scotland. Therefore, Scotland was way far behind England, and they didn't catch up until England conquered Scotland. And then they started to catch up, because once they were colonized, all of the things that they learned, all the different techniques for certain things, all the things that they made were like kind of passed down. And so people learned how to do lots of different things from their colonizers. Now, I love the point that he said. Now, were the people happy when they were I guess being conquered? No, they weren't happy that they were there. I'm sure it was a very tough time for those people. He said 1,000 years later, you can say like we owe London to Rome because we learned so much and we gained so much. But those people who are actually living through those times when their places were conquered or being colonized, it was very rough for them. They definitely didn't enjoy it. But well, I guess years down the line, you see all of the things that colonialism brought, all the positive things that it helped with. It helped them actually prosper as a nation, is what I'm getting from this video so far. Y'all let me know if I'm on the right path or if y'all think differently. This is a very interesting perspective.
Conquered Scotland, and then the culture that developed in England then could spread into Scotland as well.
Well, does this suggest then that in addressing poverty in today's world there ought to be a latter-day reincarnation of imperialism or colonialism in some form?
No, because I think politically it's impossible. I hear from various parts of some independent nations, they say that they were better off under colonialism and so on. That isn't in the cards. The people who are in the imperialist nations don't want to take on that.
But some would say that there is the functional equivalent of that in the operation of the multinational corporation today. Do you see that, the operation of the multinational corporation, as help or hindrance to the generation of wealth in developing countries?
Well, in those countries, the multinational corporations very often not only pay more money than the local industry pays, but it brings in skills that don't exist and creates industries that never were there before. To that extent, I think they are a source of the transmission of international.
So I want to look up the multinational corporation on my phone real quick, because when they talk about that, I'm not completely sure what they're talking about. What? Okay, so this is what I got. Multinational corporation is a corporate organization that owns and controls the production of goods or services in at least one country other than its home country. Okay, so it's a corporation like that goes to another country and controls the production of goods and services. And he's saying that's creating a lot of jobs and teaching skills that that country or the people in that country didn't yet have. So I'm assuming his point of view is saying multinational corporation is actually helping these countries to gain wealth.
Before, to that extent, I think they are a source of the transmission of international human capital. To that extent, yes.
Now, this excerpt is taken from the book Intellectuals and Race by Dr. Thomas Sowell. In addition to the inherent geographic advantages that Western Europe has had over Eastern Europe, for example, more navigable waterways leading to the open seas, with Western European rivers and harbors not being frozen over, as often or as long in winter as rivers and harbors in Eastern Europe, due to the warming effect of the Gulf Stream on Western Europe. Another major historic advantage growing out of geography is that Western Europe was more readily accessible to invasion by Roman conquerors. Despite the ruthless slaughters in those conquests and the subsequent brutal oppressions by the Roman overlords, among the lasting advantages which the Roman conquests brought to Western Europe were Roman letters, so that Western European languages had written versions centuries before the languages of Eastern Europe did. To the enormous advantages of literacy, as such, Western Europeans had the further advantage of a far greater accumulation of written knowledge in their languages, even after the languages of Eastern Europe began to develop written versions, but still had not yet caught up with the centuries-long accumulations of knowledge written in Western European languages. Literacy was not the only thing that moved from west to east in Europe. So did coins, printing presses, castles, crossbows, paved streets, and vaccinations, among other economic and social advances.
Jesus.
But all of this took time, sometimes centuries. Moreover, people from Western Europe, Germans, Jews and others, were often a majority of the population in Eastern European cities in earlier centuries, while Slavs remained a huge majority in the surrounding countrysides. For example, before 1312 the official records of the city of Krakow were kept in German, and the transition, at that point, was to Latin. Only decades later did Poles become a majority of the population in Krakow. The towns of medieval East Central Europe were often cultural enclaves of foreigners, again, mostly Germans, but with many Jews as well, and, in the Balkans, Greeks and Armenians, joined in later centuries by Turks. In short, there has been for centuries, not only a disparity between the opportunities and advances in the two halves of Europe, but great disparities within Eastern Europe itself, between the
Wow.
indigenous peoples of the region, and the transplanted Western Europeans living in Eastern Europe, the Baltic and the Balkans. Neither genes nor discrimination are necessary to explain this situation, though some intellectuals and politicians have chosen to claim that the differences have been due to race and others have chosen to blame social injustices.
Huh.
Many other racial and other groups in many other parts of the world have likewise ended up with large disparities in opportunities and achievements, for reasons that range across a wide spectrum and cannot be reduced to genes or injustices. Thank you for
Huh.
watching this presentation to the end. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
So this is definitely a different perspective, definitely than what I was taught, or definitely than what I've seen on plenty of videos. So those places, while conquered and invaded, were able to progress quicker than the places that weren't being touched or the places that they couldn't get to. So Roman actually helped Britain progress faster by invading and conquering and colonialism. And that part of Britain that even though they face insufferable horrors, even though they, you know what I'm saying, people were killed, people were executed, and then they were ruled over, I guess in the long run they were able to progress faster as a nation. And then we all know the British Empire went and conquered so much of the world. It's like absolutely insane. But in doing that, are we saying that colonialism helped a lot of the rest of the world progress, and a lot of their success now is due to the British Empire and colonialism and imperialism? And they're saying it can't happen today because politics and people just aren't going for that. But that's a very interesting take on it. I think I have to say it makes his points are valid and his points make sense, especially if the facts are real. If the facts are that most the places that were actually invaded have progressed, and the places that really weren't touched or that weren't under colonialism are still poor nations, then what they're saying, you can't really deny it. So they're also saying, in the beginning, I missed out on it earlier when they said, so a lot of the like blame for certain things to colonizers, to colonialism, aren't actually the reason that things are the way they are, but they actually did a lot of good, yet people blame them for everything that is wrong, because I guess that's an easier thing to blame, easier way to place the blame rather than look at what's actually are the factors that for a country being poor or less opportunity, or there's a number of things that you can actually attribute that to, but every nation that's been colonized was actually more well off years down the line. I want to hear y'all's comments. I want to see y'all's comments. What do y'all think? This is intriguing. That's all we have for that one. Make sure you guys subscribe. And if you enjoyed that reaction video, make sure you check out this one too. It's your boy Neal. Out.